Hello and welcome. Welcome. Let me get my music down. Hello and welcome to the Scientology Money Project on YouTube. Your host, Jeffrey Augustine. I've been away on doing work, really interesting work. Been out for several weeks on assignment. I have to tell you about it sometime. And been a heck of a time with the U.S. elections. And I was doing some work as a PI in politics. So being a PI can take you anywhere. Did some interesting stuff. Hey, Wayne, welcome. Glad to see you here. Hello, Denise. And, I wanted to cover, I was talking to someone, I was talking to someone, an elected person, and they were asking about my blog and Scientology. And so we got into the topic of L. Ron Hubbard and stolen valor. And his, L. Ron Hubbard served in the United States Navy in World War II. He was lieutenant, commissioned as lieutenant. And the Church of Scientology and other, Hubbard, Hubbardites, I don't know what you want to call them, have tried to portray Ron as a war hero. Hubbard tried to portray himself as a war hero. And so I wanted to take apart one little slice of, because the title of the story is that time L. Ron Hubbard got machine gunned in the back, and some of his other stolen valor stories. So I wanted to talk about that time L. Ron Hubbard got machine gunned in the back, and show why when you actually it doesn't take a lot when you dig into Hubbard with a little bit of research and you go into the U.S. Navy files, because a lot of World War II is very well documented. I've been a student of World War II my entire life. I grew up in its shadow. And so I wanted to talk about that time L. Ron Hubbard got machine gunned in the back, because Hubbard did claim that happened to him during World War II. So to set up the context, oh, hi Denise. Yeah, smash that like button and subscribe. And thank you. And I always appreciate it. I have to get I'm going to start doing podcasting again. I got some new stuff for my upcoming season. So L. Ron Hubbard, let's set the stage, what the actual record shows, because I do have my critics. And all I've said, if L. Ron Hubbard was a secret agent, just show me one document, because to make that claim, you need to prove it. I don't have to. I'm just saying the Freedom of Information Act here in the United States has been around for about 75 years. The documents have been available, and there's been a lot of leaks, the Pentagon Papers, and in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, Senator Frank Church, hearings on the CIA in the 70s, and so we've had so many leaks, and that there would be at least one document. So there's no evidence whatsoever. Chester Prudy, who was a intelligence officer of some note during his lifetime, he advised Oliver Stone on his JFK film. Prudy claimed that L. Ron Hubbard's records were sheep dipped. However, and this is the problem I have with Prudy, he didn't give a legend, or by that I mean a descriptive chart of what marks you would put in U.S. military records to show that they were sheep dipped. Moreover, Hubbard's records, his DD-214 discharge, the one the church produced, was obviously fraudulent. And so Chris Owen, the researcher Chris Owen, has really done exquisite work on this, as is John Atek, Russell Miller. I've done work on it. Margaret Lake. A lot of people on Wikipedia have done work on Hubbard's World War II record, and it's very well established. And the idea that his records were sheep dipped is, we have a term of art in the private investigative world called bullshit. So It's bullshit. Chester Prudy, I believe, was having financial problems. And when the church or its agent or its attorney approached him to say that, he gave an opinion, I believe, that was false. And he's deceased; he can't defend himself, of course. But uh, I would, as an investigator, I have reason to believe in people I've talked to that he needed the money, and he gave that opinion, and he was a dishonest opinion, which would not be out of line for Prudy because he was a conspiracy theorist, which with conspiracy theorists, that doesn't automatically eliminate them because usually they have some generally very good information at the core of the conspiracy. And so you have to take a conspiracy apart and look at what's true about it, and then look what the hypothesis they put forward or what they add to it that can't be verified or what's sensationalistic. So Prudy, when it came to the JFK assassination, there's some things that are demonstrably false, and we're not going to go there, but my whole point is Scientology hired one guy at the end of his life who needed the money. And he made a statement that the records were sheep dip, but offered no proof whatsoever. Now, Prudy, as an intelligence officer, would know that he would have to document and show evidence. These are the indicia of sheep dip records. And I've researched sheep dip records, and they wouldn't have been used in Hubbard's case. So I'm going to just take one part of what Hubbard himself said, not what a second party, Chester Prudy. And we don't even know Chester Prudy did not produce the records he examined. So the burden Prudy would have had to say, here are the records, and actually show printed copies of the records. Here are the notations which indicate to me that they're sheep dipped. He would also have to show a set of sheep dip records, an actual set of sheep dip records. And so Prudy fails as a researcher. I say he had a financial interest in doing this. And I don't think he had clean hands at all. I just don't. I don't think he had clean hands. And a lot of his writings, he had some extremist views on things. And again, that doesn't falsify. If someone has extremist views, it doesn't falsify something that they say is true or accurate. So that's why you have to be very careful. I'm not disrespecting Prudy, other than in this particular regard. I don't believe him. I don't believe him at all. And I certainly would like to look at his financial records at the time. If a member of his family wants to come on and defend him, or Hubbard, please email me. Wayne, war was a lot closer in real time. Give us a different perspective. All my dad's friends were military or war workers. Yeah. And I can say this, when interfacing with some of my critics, I've actually had security clearances, top secret security clearances when I worked at Hughes Aircraft, and I've also had clearances for some of the work when I was in technical sales. A lot of it was project management. I worked at places like Los Alamos National Labs, Berkeley, Sandia, Kirtland Air Force Base. So I was around a lot of military projects. So to the best of my knowledge, and I could be wrong, I'm the only one out there with actual military clearances. Department of Defense, I was a technical writer at Hughes Aircraft, and who's been addressing this. So I know what it's like to have security clearances. I know what it's like to be around intelligence. Some people use that against me as like it's a bad thing to have been a defense worker in the Cold War. I worked on manuals for the SPS-52C naval radar used on guided missile destroyers and aircraft carrier battle groups. I worked on the Roland, which was an anti-aircraft tank like you see now at use in Ukraine with them fighting the Russians. So what I bring to this is a different point of view, having awareness of I've been criticized for saying that L. Ron Hubbard only had one ship. How could he be a secret agent? But what I want you to do is Google CIA logistics, and espionage and intelligence takes a lot of logistics. It takes a great deal of logistics work. For example, in the US, one frontline combat soldier requires 10 support people behind he or she. So when you have a soldier, they need 10 support people. And when you have an agent in the field, you need a lot of support people, especially if you have to exfiltrate them, get them out of their position. They need a lot of support in terms of radio, satellite, human intelligence. They need a lot of support. It's not like James Bond where you just go out alone. In the movies, that's not how it is. You have to have safe houses. You have to have means of communication. You have to have technical gear. And in what we're going to talk about now, L. Ron Hubbard's claim, when that time he said he got machine gun in the back, there's a long line of logistics. So, and then another thing, one of I believe is one of the American 5-star generals in World War II, I think it was Omar Bradley, I could be wrong, but he said, amateurs talk strategy, experts talk logistics. And if you look at D-Day campaign, when General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, the logistics were enormous. Eisenhower, among other things, credited the DC-3 and the Jeep with being important to winning World War II because it gave us mobility. So there's a lot of context going on to that remark. And I'm going to do another show. I may bring a special guest on for that show, a former Marine special operator who knows all about logistics. Because when you look at the SEAL team, they need C-130 aircraft often. They'll need helicopters. And that requires a whole chain of food, fuel, ammunition, resupply. Take them in, do the operation, take them out. If you look at the operation where they killed bin Laden, there was an exceptional amount of logistics support, electronic satellites. A lot of things were going on in this, multi-$100 billion U.S. defense installation. So my point is that what Hubbard said would have required an enormous amount of logistics. The times don't line up, as I'll show. And that's kind of the preface to that, when we look at a claim made by the Church of Scientology for Hubbard, or one that Hubbard made by himself, we can take it apart and get the data and research it. That's part of showing why L. Ron Hubbard was a chronic pathological liar. He lied about a lot of things, and it's demonstrable. And for the church to claim him as a leader when he's a chronic pathological liar, well, when someone has a pattern of being a habitual liar, that's quite different than listening carefully to someone you would call a conspiracy theorist, because sometimes that's just a way to attack someone whose information you don't really want to investigate. That's why I say you approach someone who's a conspiracy theorist carefully. You listen to what's true in their data and then what is sensationalized or false. And because some parts, what some of the conspiracy theorists say are quite true. In fact, in my own lifetime, I remember being a boy in the 1960s, and the UFOs were quite a thing back then, the Condon Report. And the public was being told that UFO sightings were weather balloons or imaginary or swamp gas. And now in 2024, very legitimate military officers are talking about unknown objects around military bases, naval pilots who've seen UFOs while flying. And so in my own lifetime, I've got to see this, like something is out there. And that's why I'm always very careful to analyze data. Some stuff, of course, is just asinine on its face and stupid. So when we approach an analysis of Scientology, I've interviewed people who were there, like Bill Franks, the former executive director international, when he was alive. I've done a lot of podcasts, and you can look on my Scientology Money Project on YouTube, or it's called Surviving Scientology on YouTube. That's Karen's channel. And then I have Surviving Scientology on iTunes. So anyway, I'm glad we're having a conversation. Yeah, this is the when you look at historical logistics is so central. And yeah, this is a great comment. Flawed logistics. Hi, Kenny. Welcome to the show. So let's get into the time when L. Ron Hubbard was machine gunned in the back. So I've laid the preface down that logistics are important. Listening to, oh, what was that? Oh, I'm sorry. I've had my microphone. Hold on. I thought it was Smirsh. I have to fix this. I have a, what's this? Oh, I see what happened. I've got this, I'm redoing my microphone, and the stand here, the clip's a little bit, I've got to get some new equipment. Hold on. So having established this preface in terms of logistics, even requirements like refueling at sea, qualifications for a mission. Can you do the mission? And that's part of what I'm going to talk about. So L. Ron Hubbard was a pulp fiction writer, of course, and before World War II. So he wasn't making a lot of money. He complained of writing for a penny a word. And, the real money's in royalties where you write a novel, but he was writing for a penny a word. He was married to Polly Grubb, his first wife. He had 2 children, and he wasn't making a lot of money. L. Ron Hubbard's father, Harry Ross Hubbard, was a U.S. naval officer. So Hubbard had grown up as a military child, and he knew the Navy. So I think personally, in my long study of Hubbard, that joining the Navy was his best way out to get a reliable income. And so he applied to become a commissioned officer. He had flunked out of college, and he spent several years writing with some success, but not a lot. But the point I want to emphasize, L. Ron Hubbard was a typewriter jockey. He spent his days cranking out pulp fiction for a penny a word. He had no military training, except a little bit. When he was in college, he was in the United States Marine Corps. He joined, and he didn't do it full time, but he said he was a master sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and he's in only for a very short time, around 1932. And I don't know if it was an ROTC program at George Washington University, but he said himself that he just basically did marching on a field with other soldiers. How you get to be a master sergeant, I think in E9, in that short of a time is unexplained. What we do know is that he was discharged from the Marine Corps after serving a short time, and his discharge paper said not to be reenlisted. So L. Ron Hubbard was permanently banned from reenlisting in the United States Marine Corps, which is very unusual and suggests that they don't want him back for whatever reasons. It could have been psychological. I got in an argument with Margaret Lake that, and I had a handler when I was on Xenu.net, with her crazy person. I thought L. Ron Hubbard may have had a lobotomy at the Naval Hospital when he was in the Marines. He might have had a breakdown. I raised that as a question. Oh my gosh, that's going back in time. So anyway, L. Ron Hubbard was in the Marine Corps for a short time. He grew up in the Navy. He's not cutting it as a pulp fiction writer at a penny a word. So he gets himself commissioned as a lieutenant, and this was before Pearl Harbor. That's important. So we'll jump right into it. And oh, you know what? I want to remove that. I don't got ahead in that. I go back. The duplicitous Fletcher Prudy was one of the people promoting the idea of Hubbard as an intelligent agent, as an asset. Yes, I think Fletcher Prouty was paid to do so by the church. And it's just like the book Alien Agenda by Jim Marrs. And let me see if I have that here. I'm going to have to get something to hold on my microphone. I'm having problems with it. I'm rebuilding my studio. Okay, so hold on. Do I have Alien Agenda here? This is another example, Adam. Hold on. Oh my gosh. And anyway, Alien Agenda by Jim Marrs. David Miscavige loved the book. That's what Marty Rothman told me. And he ordered everyone on the base to read it. Now, Jim Marrs, at the end of his life, when he was financially strapped, and I found that out. If his family wants to reach out to me, Jim Marrs was seen at Scientology Writers of the Future and other events. He promoted Battlefield Earth. He needed the money and the church paid him. So you get older and you need money and you got family to support and you got bills and you have health problems that you'll do a lot of stuff for money. And Jim Marrs showing up at Scientology, he's free to do anything he wants, but I didn't have a lot of respect for him as a writer. I thought he did some interesting things, but he had an audience. But when he promoted Scientology, he's obviously doing it for the money. So Fletcher, maybe we can do a show on Fletcher. I'm going to branch out in 2025. Brendana, please report to the broadcast. Yeah, Brendana is here. And Brendana, can you find Alien Agenda? Yeah, Jim Marrs, it's a great book. So we're going far afield. We haven't gotten to the main thing I've been talking about. So I was just setting context. So we're going to go. Okay, so here's our on Hubbard action hero. Do that from the Sergeant Rock comic books. Great series of comic books. And there's an argument that Marvel should bring back Sergeant Rock, and I agree. So I shooped Hubbard on there to show that he was an action hero. You know, L. Ron Hubbard did steal a Tommy gun when he left the U.S. Navy. He did get his hands on a Tommy gun and stole it. And he talked about having the Tommy gun that he took from the Navy. So here's what L. Ron Hubbard was doing. I want to emphasize L. Ron Hubbard had no training in amphibious operations, hand-to-hand combat, special weapons. L. Ron Hubbard had no training in anything. So he was a typewriter jockey. And when he joins the Navy, he gets a commission. He's making about $2,500 a month by today's dollars. That was $166.42. And now this thing, you can now get out your hanky because you're going to be crying. This is what L. Ron Hubbard wrote in something called My Philosophy. This is from my unpublished manuscript. You can read along, but I'll read it for you because it's worth reading. He says, quote, "There have been many wiser men than I, but few have traveled as much road." That's bullshit, Ron. Okay, quote, and he goes on, "I have seen life from the top down and the bottom up. I know how it looks both ways, and I know there is wisdom and that there is hope." And here's where you're going to cue the soap opera music, Brendana. Ron writes, "Blinded with injured optic nerves and lame with physical injuries to hip and back at the end of World War II, I faced an almost non-existent future. My service record states that this officer has no neurotic or psychotic tendencies of any kind whatsoever, but it also states permanently disabled physically," unquote. Now, I want to pause there. So L. Ron Hubbard said that he was permanently disabled physically at the end of World War II. So let's resume. Quote, "And so there came a further blow. I was abandoned by family and friends as a supposedly hopeless cripple and a probable burden upon them for the rest of my days. I yet worked my way back to fitness and strength in less than 2 years, using only what I knew and could determine about man and his relationship to the universe. I had no one to help me. What I had to know, I had to find out. And it's quite a trick studying when you cannot see." Notice there. because he was crippled and blinded. So he says it's quite a trick studying when you cannot see. Yeah, when you're blind, you can't study. Okay, so let's go on with it. Quote, I became used to being told it was all impossible, that there was no way, no hope. Yet I came to see again and walk again, and I built an entirely new life. I'm weeping. It is such a happy life, a busy one, and I hope a useful one. My only moments of sadness are those which come together when bigoted men tell others all is bad and there is no root anywhere, no hope anywhere, nothing but sadness and sameness and desolation, and that every effort to help others is false. I know it is not true. So in my book, I asked just how crippled and blinded was L. Ron Hubbard at the end of World War II. Well, before we get to the time when he was machine gunned, he was so crippled and blinded that when he was discharged from the Navy, there up at Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, I think he may have went over to the Presidio in San Francisco. I forget. I think he was discharged at the Presidio. Nevertheless, I was crippled and blinded at the end of the World War II, and I faced an almost non-existent future. I was such a burden. Um, so, yeah. Anyway, okay. So he was so crippled and blinded that instead of going north to Puget Sound to be with his wife and two kids, he drove south to live at Jack Parsons' free love community, where he proceeded to basically have sexual relationships with multiple women there. It was a free love thing. So I think if you're crippled and blinded, you're not going to drive your car with your little travel trailer, 425 miles from San Francisco down to Pasadena, California, and then proceed to have sex with everything that walks, including Jack. They did their magic wand thing. So, plus he had sexually transmitted disease during the war that he talks about in his affirmations. He treated with some. Okay, so he had got a dose of the clap. You know, probably from honeypot spice and not by Hitler. I don't know. Okay, now, so here's what I want to set up. So Hubbard joins the Navy before World War I. I'm sorry, World War II. So from September 22 to October 6, 41, he's in the hydrographic office of the Navy. There he was doing some charts. Hubbard and his wife had sailed up from Puget Sound up to Ketchikan, Alaska, and Hubbard had made some charts in the Navy and sent them to the Navy. They said, okay, sort this stuff out. We're not sure what you're doing here with these charts. And he did as Explorers Club, which is another rant I'm going to get on sometime about why the Explorers Club would even admit him. Okay, so then after he worked on those charts for 2 weeks, he went inactive from October 7 to November 22, 1941. This is important. So on November 23, 1941, before Pearl Harbor, he was just under instruction at the headquarters of the 3rd Naval District. That's where, he's an officer. They're going to teach you officer protocol, military rules, what reports. They're going to teach you basically, it's an indoctrination into being a military officer. And you would expect that. And then Hubbard, I think, later picked it up for Sea Org and how to be in the Sea Org. Welcome aboard, shipmate. So Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, of course, by the Kido Butai, the 6 aircraft carriers of the Japanese Navy and their support vessels. Destroyed, surprise attack. Now, the next thing that happens, okay, so the war breaks out. Australia is undefended. And so the United States, they need weapons and planes. So on December 19, 1941, Hubbard, and these dates are important. So Hubbard boards the USS President Polk. And what the U.S. sends are several P-40 Kitty Hawk fighters that Claire Chennault was using in China. So they sent some fighter planes, a lot of ammunition, not just for machine guns, but for artillery and food and other things. So Hubbard gets put on the President Polk. They leave December 1941. New Year, changes. So the President Polk arrives January 12, 1942. And this was a fairly new ship, but it was slow. It was a slow ship. So that's why it takes, that long to get over to Brisbane. And then L. Ron Hubbard arrives back on March 23, 1942. Now, what's important here, Hubbard arrives January 12, 1942, and he's out of Australia 10 weeks later. So the point I want to emphasize here is Hubbard's only in Australia for 10 weeks. 10 weeks. And so what he says happens is we're going to get back into this. So he's only there 10 weeks, and he's got 10 weeks to accomplish the following. So this is the President Polk. It was a new ship. It was laid down in 1940 and put into service. And a nice looking boat. So this is the USS Edsall. It's a 1920 era 4-stack destroyer. Hubbard said that when he got to Brisbane, he was put aboard the USS Edsall. And we know this from Jerry Armstrong, because in Armstrong versus Mary Sue Hubbard sued Jerry in 84, I believe, to get back Hubbard's papers that Jerry had taken. And this was Church of Scientology of California versus Gerald Armstrong. Mary Sue Hubbard as intervener. L. Ron Hubbard would not show up in court, so he had Mary Sue do it for him. And there's actually LA Superior Court case number C420153. If you want to look it up, C420153. It's posted on Jerry's site. And Moulton, Mr. Moulton, one of the people who had served with who had served underneath L. Ron Hubbard when he was had his little boats he commanded, said that Ron told him this whole story about being machine gunned in Java, and it's quite something. So L. Ron Hubbard claims that he was such an uber super secret agent that the U.S. Navy would take a guy who'd been a typewriter jockey, no evidence whatsoever that he'd ever been trained at all, no special skills, and they put him on a boat, and they took him from Brisbane to Java. Now, this is where the fun part gets. Okay, so again, I want to emphasize there's only a 10-week period between him arriving and leaving. So this doesn't leave us a lot of time for L. Ron Hubbard to get machine gun in the back. But okay, now this is Brisbane where he landed, and that's Jakarta. But the Japanese were fighting in that area. So the Imperial Japanese Navy was almighty, and they were very active early in the war, because the Kido Butai, the Japanese main body, the aircraft carriers, they were uncontested. Nobody could stop them the first 6 months of the war. And so they were rampaging. So Hubbard asks us to believe that the U.S. Navy risks a destroyer, and that they're going to take Hubbard and another guy ashore to Java to do some secret agent stuff. It's absurd on its face. You wouldn't transport two guys, because the Philippines had collapsed, and the Asiatic Command collapsed along with it when General MacArthur left. There was nothing left of it. They decimated the forces on the Philippines. So there's a lot of chaos breaking loose. And what's interesting, Hubbard's claiming to be being taken to Java on a vessel, and they're not going to risk a carrier to launch two guys. There's nothing Hubbard could do, and that's assuming that the USS Edsall, it's Edsall, the Edsall could break through Japanese reconnaissance patrol planes, the Kido Butai, the Imperial Japanese Navy, that one ship could run that gauntlet. And that ship, that's a long way. It would have to be refueled, and we'll show it. But Hubbard also said that when he was ashore, he was the senior naval officer in Brisbane. And actually, Chris Owen had uncovered some work that Hubbard, that Tony Ortega published and Chris published, that Hubbard actually was responsible for getting some Allied ships sunk, torpedoed and sunk because of his incompetence. So, back to Brisbane. How far is that? Well, I went on it. Okay, so the distance, I used an online calculator, and they could have sailed maybe another way, but this is what this online facility gave me. It would be 4,237 nautical miles. And that's assuming you had a speed of 25 knots. So it would take you 7 days at sea. So supposedly, the Edsall leaves, runs a gauntlet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, which was almighty, had 6 aircraft carriers in the area. And we know that, and I'll tell you why the Kido Butai was there shortly. So they had their main battle fleet there. And the power of the Kido Butai cannot be underestimated. These were 6 Japanese carriers with highly trained pilots who destroyed the bulk of the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor. Our carriers weren't there, but again, you don't have one ship unescorted. It's not going to be able to. It's not going to be able to do it. But let's just assume, for the sake of Hubbard's lunatic argument, okay, you have to go. The ship doesn't have enough fuel oil to go, bunker oil to go 4,237 miles without being refueled at sea. You just can't. Destroyers were very thirsty. I mean, even if it was doing its top clip of 35 knots, the Edsall, it would run out of fuel over, almost instantly. So it's going to take 7 days running at 25 knots to get Hubbard and this other agent, who we never named. Hubbard never named the other guy who he claimed to be there with. And then I'm going to show you. I've got to go. My slide didn't work here, so let me share a screen. Let me share a screen. I'm going to just lay this out. Okay, share screen. I had a little bit of a glitch. Okay. So you can see that the Edsall's location on January 20th, 1942. Okay, now we're going to go back and we're going to remember that Hubbard arrived on January 12th, 1942, right? So we learn from the U.S. Navy history. You can see to the right the Edsall's location on January 20, 1942. It was doing anti-submarine warfare off the coast of Darwin. So Hubbard arrives on January 12. 8 days later, the Edsall's part of an anti-submarine unit, and actually they did sink the Edsall, and other ships did sink an Imperial Japanese Navy submarine that day. And that was the first sinking of a Japanese submarine by a United States vessel. That happened off the coast of Darwin on January 20, 1942. So clearly, the Edsall was operating in anti-submarine duty with other ships. And that's all documented. And then the other data point, Len, let's remember. So clearly, the Edsall wouldn't have been underway to Java. Well, it was going to Surabaya. There were big Japanese bases there, but nonetheless, to the right side, you can see where I have X. The Edsall was sunk by the Imperial Japanese Navy on March 1, 1942, approximately 225 miles east of Christmas Island. So in this time frame, Hubbard arrives January 12th. He leaves March 23rd. The Edsall sunk on March 1. So it takes 7 days for the Edsall to go if it's running at 25 knots, and it has to be refueled. Like, again, that goes to logistics. It cannot do a voyage of 4,237 miles and return which gives us 8,400 miles. A destroyer can't do that. They're thirsty. It can't do an 8,400 mile trip, which would take 14 days. So Hubbard again, and this is what I want to make. So we know that Hubbard is returned on March 23 and the Edsel sunk on March 1st. So that gives us between January 20 after the Edsel, they would have had to go 4,200 miles in 7 days and turn around. And to do what? Hubbard claimed to Thomas Moulton, who served with him on his second ship, because Hubbard's first ship, just a coastal patrol boat, he never took command of it. He got in an argument with the commander of the shipyard on the East Coast, and so he never saw duty. He only saw duty on his second ship over out of Portland, where that was the one where he attacked the iron ore deposit on the bottom of the ocean in a long extended battle. So the only point here we have is that there's the time frame doesn't fit. There's not enough time to get Hubbard to Java. But it gets more impossible because we have a 10-week period. Hubbard claimed that he told Thomas Moulton that he went ashore in Java and that he and his unnamed fellow spy, Hubbard said he was machine gunned in the back. So there was no plan. I guess the Edsel put him ashore in a raft, he and his companion, because Hubbard said after he was machine gunned, he and his companion took to a life raft. They took to a life raft. And they, okay, let me just go back. So he said he was shot and they floated back this great distance. So Orrin Hubbard said he was in a life raft, machine gunned. So he didn't bleed to death or die. He didn't get his lungs torn apart or his spine torn apart, his heart, liver, spleen, kidney. Liver, apparently, no antibiotics, untreated. So we're to believe that Hubbard was machine gun in Java and he floated back on a life raft, he says, 4,237 miles, and then was spotted by either an Australian or U.S. naval vessel and picked up. How long would it take you to float 4,237 miles if you're machine gunned? You have no water. I mean, you've got a little bit of I don't know, what is it on a U.S. raft of that period? You got a little bit of water and some chocolate bars and the flare gun. And you're bleeding to death in machine gun, but somehow, so that's really what puts the light of the story, is that the time frame, I mean, you have to ocean current. It would take weeks and weeks and weeks for you to get back because Hubbard's got to be out there by March 23rd. And the Edsel would have had to do it after January 20th when it sank the Japanese submarine. So we're to believe that Hubbard would have you believe that he floated this long, and there's a couple ways with the currents. It doesn't have to be the red map, but you get the point. It's about 4,000 miles, even if you go further down to the south and float through the Banda Sea. So it's lunatic. It just doesn't work because, one, you need medicine if you get shot. You need surgery, but apparently it wasn't being shot that bad. And so he floats back. Now this is a World War II life raft, and I gotta, this it's out of a movie, but so you're supposed to float 4,237 miles. Yes, they actually believe it. They actually believe it, and that's why they hired Prudy to say the records were sheep dipped to help support it. Hi, Em and Mary. Wow, that is unbelievable as someone who has the Brooklyn Bridge to sell me. It is. And yeah, they actually believe it. Yeah, they believe it. But you know what's happened is over time, uh, the Church of Scientology has walked back a lot of their claims for Hubbard in World War II because of people online showing that a lot of stuff is bullshit. And still in Valor, Hubbard claimed to have 27 medals, including 2 Purple Hearts, when he never fought a day in combat. And I think if you got machine gunned in the back in Java and then floated 4,237 miles, and just by chance, pure coincidence, a ship would spot you. The thing is, in a war zone, the Japanese air patrol, if they spotted you, they would have machine gunned Hubbard to death. That's what happened at Midway. Ensign George Gay was shot down, and he was in a TBD dive bomber, and his 2 crewmates died, I believe, and he used the seat cover from his seat to put over his head to hide himself from Japanese aircraft because they were machine gunning both sides in World War II, in the Japanese and the South and Central Pacific showed no mercy. They shot people apart in the water. They shot people apart in parachutes. So obviously they had patrol, and Hubbard in an open life raft would have been spotted. But so the whole story falls apart under analysis. He has a Walter Mitty version of the George H.W. Bush rescue story. True. There's a picture of George H. Bush. He was the youngest naval aviator at the time, being shot down over I think it was Chichijima or the island next to it. He was shot down, and he was off the coast, and the Japanese wanted to send out a boat to kill him or capture him, and fighters, Allied U.S. fighters, shot at them, and a submarine popped up to rescue the future president. Was a true war hero. And so Hubbard floats untreated from machine gun wounds, and he floats and floats and floats in no water. And this would have taken, like I said, 4,237 miles. That would have taken forever. So that just on the time, the whole thing falls apart. And you can go to Wiki. This is just a cut from Wiki. And the reason we know this is there's fueling operations. The Edsall and Alden were escorting the Darwin-bound Euler Trinity, and they cite the and a Japanese submarine cites the Trinity, which is an Euler, and misidentified her as a transport, fired torpedoes. Now here we have the exact coordinates, so that's why I could determine the location. Wiki gives me the location where the Japanese submarine fired the torpedoes on January 20, 1942. And that's why when we get these coordinates, latitude and longitude, that's why in my earlier chart, I could actually show, the location of the ships. Oh, wait, I had this on another screen. Yeah, that's why Wiki allowed me, I just typed in this to Google Maps, Google World, and I was able to get an exact location based on the Wiki data. So you can see to the right-hand side, we know from what we just saw on Wiki, we know the exact latitude, longitude, where they were on January 20th, because that's in the actual reports. And those were taken from naval logs. So we know where the Edsall was, we know what it was doing, and it was not hauling L. Ron Hubbard's fat ass to Java, because all he knew was how to operate a typewriter. And anyway, now there's the Edsall, the 4-stack 1920 version. That's an actual picture. This is the Japanese Navy took this photo of the Edsall being attacked. Admiral Nagumo, who was the commander of the Kido Butai, the Japanese Navy fired several hundred shells at it, and then Amo Nagumo ordered some Japanese dive bombers up to finish off the vessel, and it sank in 18,000 feet of water. I mean, that part of the world's got very deep water. So it sank in 18,000 feet. The Navy, I think the Australian Navy found it decades later, but it sank in 18,000 feet of water. Bad ending. So that story falls apart. And just that fragment alone shows Hubbard's habitual pattern of lying, because there's no reason and then the other thing, he's claiming to have been machine gunned in the back. But when he died up there in Creston in 1986, the coroner examined the body, uh, and they found no machine gun bullets in the back. Um, the blood pools when you die on your back, or and I forget the exact term for that pooling of the blood, but they observed that Hubbard had been dead for some time because the blood pooled. This is because when they found him dead, they had to call David Miscavige and Dr. Dank, and everyone had to rush up to the base to clean it. I think that's where David Miscavige got his millions and millions of dollars. The David Miscavige starter kit, because L. Ron Hubbard had a lot of cash at the base. I think they went and cleaned out the Rolexes and the cameras and the money, because when the deputies finally show up, they want to know why it took so long to report his death. The motorhome was spotless, but that's another thing. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Hubbard invented a story about being machine gunned in the back, being a war hero, but there's abundant evidence that never happened. The U.S. Navy records don't record it, because really, if there would be a ship that would record that we picked up some people, but the time frame doesn't fit. So that's why they hire Chester Prudy, who's dubious, to give a sheep-dipped, that his records were sheep-dipped to hide the fact he was actually an agent. Chester Prudy failed to show, like I said, he failed to show what a set of sheep-dipped records look like, or what are the marks they make, or how do you know they're sheep-dipped? Tell us. Because if I tell you something, I have to show you they make these marks, they do this thing, they do that thing. On Operation Paperclip, where they were bringing Nazi scientists and technical personnel into America, they had a little code where their file, they would put a paperclip on it. So that we know. See, that's an example. You could say if there was a paperclip on the record of a German scientist, then he was deemed denazified, and therefore he could go to work for the U.S. Now, the U.S. military-industrial complex wanted all these German rocket scientists because they had the nuclear weapon and they wanted to build ICBMs. So they would overlook whether they were denazified or not. But at least you could say if it had a paperclip on it, that's how they could tell that there was what's called Operation Paperclip. So we actually have physical evidence to know how they ignored whether these people were still Nazis in thought or attitude, and they wanted them in the U.S. military program. Someone recently made the remark that had Werner von Braun been alive today, he'd be charged as a war criminal. But as it was, he hid all the files, extensive records, in a cave, and then negotiated with the Allies, basically for immunity from being charged with war crimes for he and his team, because he was involved in the terror bombing of London with the V2s, V1s. So real history we know, and there's evidence. When there's just stuff that Scientology makes up, and it's easy to show just from naval records, then we know that it's a lie. Hubbard told other lies about his World War II career, but I just wanted to come on and talk to you about contextually what's gone on historically in the debate about Hubbard's World War II career, why Scientology has walked back things, but they still assert other things. So I'm going to go through a period of talking about L. Ron Hubbard's military career. What I'm doing is debunking the claim that he was a secret agent of any kind. I'm debunking it. if and like I said, this has been an argument for a long time. And again, I go down to my standard, just show me one document. You've had 75 years of Freedom of Information Act, as I said, tons of leaks during that period. You can file FOIA requests, and so many people have filed FOIA requests. And Hubbard's military record is pretty well understood. It's pretty well known. And what really happened, and let me get what really happened, it's pretty straightforward. And it's been documented, like I said, by Chris Owen, John Atack, and the documents are all there. Let me just share the screen. So anyway, the records are all there, thanks to researchers. And I'm going to show you this from my manuscript. And okay, so this is part of my manuscript I'm working on. And I'm going to do Hubbard. I'm going to do it from Hubbard's birth up through his death as book 1, because it's just too much. You can see right now the section you're looking at is 184,000 words. Okay, so I chart, based on my own research and that of others to whom I'm indebted, the timeline of what happens. And I even give the list of what the Polk carried over: 55 P-40s, 4 C-53, 55 pilots, 20 million 30 caliber rounds, 447,000 50 caliber rounds, 30,000 3-inch AAA and 5,075 millimeter rounds of ammunition, along with 5 carloads of torpedoes, over 615,000 pounds of rations, and 178 officers and men. That's how much cargo that Polk could carry. And of course, I acknowledge in the footnote, retrieved online from the website Ron the War Hero, where researcher and historian Chris Owen's research is featured. Yeah, if you want to type in Ron the War Hero, Chris Owen just does superb work. And then I also cite the actual U.S. Navy site, where they give photos and history, part of the war, part of the logs of the Polk. So this is how much is available to you. Now, this is another document, and this has been cited. This is talking about point number 4. This officer is not satisfactory for independent duty assignment. He is garrulous and tries to give the impressions of his importance. He also seems to think that he has unusual ability in most lines. These characteristics indicate that he will require close supervision for satisfactory performance. So this LD Casey sending this to the Bureau of the Navy. Basically, Hubbard had gotten some ships sunk. They ordered him to report to the U.S. Shamo for passage to the United States. And so this is out of the archives, and there's his Lafayette Round. Hubbard is ordered to return via Shamo and report to Com 12. He is unsatisfactory for any available assignment here via President Coolidge, or report mailed. So you can see that this went into his discipline file. And these are all the records that are available to you if you want to research it. And of course, the things that, so I put out the timeline, and I go into the only interesting thing in my research that I haven't been able to conclusively prove, and I discussed this with Margaret Lake. I think her website's still up. Margaret Lake appears to be a researcher hired by Scientology who does some pretty good work. And I got into a friendly debate with her. The only thing we can't conclusively prove, and I might go back and revisit it, Hubbard said, he said that I was returned as the first casualty of the war on the president. No, let me rephrase that. Take 2. Hubbard said, he wrote, I was returned as the first casualty of the war aboard the Secretary of the Navy's private plane. So Hubbard actually claimed that he was returned, that the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, flew his private airplane to Brisbane to pick up L. Ron Hubbard and return him privately. And there's no record of Secretary Knox doing that. But also on the Chamot, I think you pronounce it Chamount. There's no record of Hubbard. This is one problem where Margaret Lake and I talked, and it appears. Here's what I think happened. I'm typing in Margaret Lake to see if her site's still up because it was interesting, and she was out. Ron Hubbard War Hero. Just let me get this. Oh no. So how did L. Ron Hubbard get home from Brisbane? And then when he got home, oh, by the way, I wanted to give some history before when I'm looking for Margaret Lake's website. Margaret, where are you? Wow, if her site went down, that's too bad. It had some interesting things on it, and I'd sent her some stuff. Oh yeah, on the Saturday Night Live skit of Neurotology, it's the founder of Neurotology died of pink eye. One thing I want to say, in Australia, when the US sent a lot of people over, there was not a lot of room. So they took an old horse racing track and they set up quarters at this horse racing track, and there were open pit latrines. So when Hubbard returned to the US, he had to go to the hospital, the Naval Hospital there in San Francisco, and he had catarrhal fever, which my research shows was a catch-all diagnosis. It was like when people were dying during COVID, they would just tag them die of COVID. During that period, due to overcrowding, there were unhealthy conditions and people got sick. There were open pit latrines and a lack of sanitation, and people were getting conjunctivitis and pink eye. So Hubbard said he came back to the US saying conjunctivitis, hence the pink eye, which is very common in military settings with barracks, close quarters living, lack of hygiene. It's been known since the history of warfare, where you have a groups of people living close together in unclean conditions because it's passed by touch. It's pink eye can spread through barracks, dormitories, really any communal living situation. So Hubbard had to go into the hospital and get treated. He said he was returned as the first casualty of the war. That claim, too, is also bullshit, because he said he was the youngest Eagle Scout in America. So for him to say he was returned as the first casualty of the war, there's no evidence of that. What Scientology would have to do is show that he was the first casualty of the war. Let's back this up a minute, because this statement is so absurd on its face. The first casualties of the war were the men and women killed at the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's it. The 3,000 plus United States soldiers, civilians, because some of the civilian technicians were killed. The 3,000 Americans, Pacific Islanders, male and female children were killed. Those 3,000 people were the first casualties of the war. So when Hubbard says, I was returned as the first casualty of the war, he walks over the backs of 3,000 dead at Pearl Harbor to make that asinine claim. And it's so insulting. And he doesn't even stop to think. He doesn't even stop to think about the dead at Pearl Harbor. So he was not the first casualty of the war. And Scientology, the saying Jesus said in the Bible of the Pharisees that they'll, strain at a gnat, but swallow camels. And that just means Hubbard obviously was not the first casualty of the war. This claim that he was returned on the Secretary of the Navy's private plane, was to emphasize his importance. Like he could pick up the phone and call the Secretary of the Navy, pull him out of a meeting with President Roosevelt, and say, Mr. Secretary, I need your plane down here. I'm wounded. I have pink eye. Like, you're not the president. The Secretary of the Navy is not going to send his private plane to because one, his plane doesn't have the distance. The only planes that had the ability to fly that far were the Pan Am Clippers. The Secretary of the Navy used a different plane at that time, and I looked it up, and it was, I guess, maybe a C-53, DC-3, I don't know. But the Navy, if Ron Hubbard had pink eye and he'd gotten sick because he opened pit latrines and he had the flu, whatever, they're not going to fly him out. There's nothing too important about him. But it does appear in my conversations with Mark Lake that L. Ron Hubbard might have, and he said later that he did this, he might have falsified some orders to get himself a seat on the Pan Am Clipper. And I have that on my Scientology Money project. I have the routes, the Clipper routes. So it's very possible that Hubbard did not want to get on a slow boat back to the US, because some of these slow boats are 12 knots. And he didn't want to get on a slow boat back to China in Japanese infested waters where he could get killed. And so he said that he falsified a set of orders. It's a 1953 lecture, 54. He said he falsified a set of orders and got himself a seat on the Pan Am Clipper, which seems to fit, except I'm looking at the Pan Am records and I never got to the bottom of that because I have to go to the Pan Am archives of the Pan Am Clippers. So it appears, though, that he falsified a set of orders, signed the name of a commanding officer, forged the name of it, and was flown back that way. Now, I could be wrong, but that's an area that's really interesting. So when we look at Aaron Hubbard's career, it's easy to pull apart. The first casualties of the war happened at Pearl Harbor. They happened in the Philippines when the Japanese army overran General MacArthur's forces, and that resulted in the Bataan Death March. So a knowledge of history and the facts show that Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and there were other actions as well. So Hubbard was far from the first casualty of the war. He was never machine gunned in the back because when he died, they examined the body, no bullet wounds. And it's improbable that you would get machine gunned and drift 4,237 miles in the ocean. You would die. You would just die on the island. You would never get off Java if you were machine gunned by the Japanese. And that also assumes that the Japanese shot him. And then they had overwhelming force, so they're going to shoot him and just leave. Typically, in that kind of situation, the Japanese would approach both of the guys that got shot, Hubbard and his unnamed companion, and they would give a headshot to do the coup de grace. Because an enemy combatant, you want to make sure they're dead, and it's typical after a firefight to go over in combat and do headshots to finish off your enemy. Just put a bullet in their head. So, and you don't leave them, because if you only wounded them, they could get back up and kill you and your other soldiers. So you finish them off. So nothing on it adds up. And I think over the holidays, I'm going to go through more of World War II. I would like to do that part. It's been well researched, but it's up for a more contemporary discussion because there's a new audience coming in. I'm hoping to get, like I said, a Marine Corps special operator on the show to discuss it, which would be a lot of fun. So he's weighed in, and I hope that. So I want to thank you for watching. Any questions before I go? Oh, one thing. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I hope you found that interesting. But it just shows Hubbard's will to lie in the Church of Scientology's. We're going to go back into some history on my next podcast. And what it comes down to is you had a guy, this is what he was doing right before he became a war hero. He wrote The Kingslayer. That's the bottom story. And you can see the Earth in the background glowing. So this happened on another planet. And you can see in 1940 that he was already thinking space opera. On top of that, Pebble in the Sky by Isaac Asimov. So he was, a good writer, not like Asimov, but he was there. So this is what Hubbard was doing. And then he pivots from this, and you can see Hubbard's frame of mind is that he must be a hero, the Kingslayer on another planet. So we'll talk about next time. Yes, that's a great point. The Japanese and the Imperial Japanese were brutal. They wouldn't have let a foreign soldier live. I'm so glad you said that, seven, because you do. They butchered the enemy. They showed there was no quarter given, no mercy shown at all. In fact, at the Battle of Midway, they picked up Ensign Bruno Guido. He was famous for a battle. I think it happened at Midway, maybe earlier. I think it was Midway. No, it was earlier. But Bruno Guido, a plane was approaching. A Japanese aircraft was approaching an American carrier, and it was a kamikaze, and or was going to drop a bomb. But Ensign Guido jumped in an aircraft that was parked and shot it down. He was awarded a medal. He was later captured by the Japanese Navy. They interrogated him and the fellow he was captured with. And after they tortured and interrogated them, they weighted them down and threw them off the ship. So they were very brutal. So for Hubbard to think, that he was any kind of war hero, none of this happened. And so we're going to get into some other of his weird stories. Like we're going to talk about on the next episode, we're going to talk about Nazi spies, and getting a syringe driven into your heart to kill you, and some other things. So anyway, for the Scientology Money Project, let's see if we have any comments. These are great comments, These are great comments. Thank you for watching. And so we're at an hour 12. I'm going to jump off. I was going to make these a series of short pieces. So I may do 4 15-minute pieces. But this long form was just kind of introduce you to like what's been going on this ongoing debate for the last 25 years, 30 years about Hubbard the war hero. And that leads into, was L. Ron Hubbard kidnapped in 1972, killed and replaced by a body double? Or did he die in 1980 and was replaced by a body double? So there's a lot of stuff about Hubbard that's interesting. And I want to kind of cover that space because it hasn't been looked into for a while. There's been other things going on YouTube. But I just want to go to the founder and look at Hubbard the man. A lot of things that are good for a new audience to hear about. And I'll post the documents and all the in the YouTube links to my blog, other sources, Chris Owens. I think for people who like the history of war and want to know more about Hubbard, this is really good because it goes to the very credibility of the church that it's founded in lies. Its founder was lies. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So anyway, my advice to you, don't get machine gunned in the back. It's not healthy for you. And have a great weekend. Hope you have an absolutely great weekend. Karen and I are busy. We're going to our busy time with the gallery, and I'm through with my work. Yeah, well, thank you, Warrior Quinn. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And we're going to exit out on some nice music. So have a fabulous weekend. I'll probably be back tomorrow and Sunday for 2 lives. So we're going to talk about Nazi spies. L. Ron Hubbard and Nazi spies. There's another tale about the Imperial Japanese Navy where L. Ron Hubbard claimed to be spying on it. He actually claimed to be spying on the Japanese Navy. Ooh, this is interesting stuff. So having been around a long time and studying him, it's so much fun to see how, what he's willing to do and say. But this is a reflection of the church. It's just built on lies. And so we're going to have some fun with it. I'm trying to get my music up as I exit. So, tip of the hat to you. Thanks for showing up. We'll see you very soon. And I want to get my, there we go. Okay.